At Domo, we're transforming business by putting data to work for everyone. Traditional BI gets the job done for executives making decisions, but Domo goes beyond that to provide data experiences that enable quick action on those insights for anyone on the front lines.
Modern data experiences to me means that you're using data to make decisions, that you are using data in a way that drives efficacy, that drives value.
Anthony, we're not hearing you.
Chuck. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Hello, my name is Anthony Dayton. I'm joining you from the edge of space and time itself. I'm taking over for Andy Palmer as the track producer for this session, Why BI Programs Fail to Scale, the Data Decision Gap. This is really a great session from our friends at Domo and Manchester Street. And in this session, the speakers will share some of the new research findings on how companies are navigating the digital transformation process, how they're building a culture, a data-driven culture, and improving the adoption of BI technologies, sharing the right applications that every company really should have in their tech stack. Before we get started in the meat of the content, a couple of housekeeping items. This session is recorded, so any presentations will be included in the symposium proceedings. And the video recordings will be uploaded to the CDOIQ YouTube channel about 3 months after the symposium. From a Q&A perspective, given that this session is pre-recorded, if you have questions, please use the Whova platform to address those to the speaker directly. With that, I will hand things over to Mohammed, Nikos, and Ken.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in today. My name is Mohammed Aaser. I'm the Chief Data Officer here at Domo. Today, we're going to be talking about why most BI and data analytics programs fail to scale and what it takes to succeed. We'll also explore the data decision gap, a new study that we've conducted with CIOs, chief data officers, and vice presidents in data-oriented positions to understand what's causing these challenges. After the discussion, viewers will be able to, for those who are participating, will be able to benefit from a short product demonstration so you can see the Domo platform in action. Also, you'll see that there's a Q&A window on the right side of your screen. Please ask questions. We're going to do our best to try to address those during the discussion. So before I introduce our guest, I want to start with a few observations that I've had over the years in the data space. So I've spent the better part of a decade now leading and running data analytics teams, both at financial services companies, as well as large services and consulting organizations. And on the bright side, I have actually seen some really, really good impact from the investments that have been made in data. Some really amazing use cases, some reporting that's been done. However, there's I think a broad agreement that a lot of those efforts, while they've been some tangible benefits, they have truly been challenged in living up to their potential. And I've seen three different trends. The first one being that often most of the organization is left out from the data party, if you will. They don't have access to the data investments and they can't make the most of it. A lot of them sit in our lines of business, like the marketing and operations and so on. The second is it just takes a very, very long time to connect data together and solve problems. Often, a lot of teams spend anywhere from 6 to 12 months to build basic data apps, when in fact, people should be able to, in my view, it should be a lot faster than that. And then the third area is that there continues to remain a talent challenge, and those talent challenges create a lot of continuity risk for data and analytics teams. And in some cases, they also we've been focused so much on hiring data professionals that we sometimes have been challenged to really upskill and train up the rest of our organizations to truly use data. So those have been a couple of the observations that I've had. But I'd love to really turn it over to a couple of the experts and, quite frankly, to the data from the research. And so, with that, I'm really excited to invite and introduce Ken Rufo, who's principal at Manchester Street and the researcher behind the Data Decision Gap.
Thank you, Mohammed. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ken, thank you for joining us. Can you just tell us a little bit about the research? Who you're targeting and what were you trying to understand?
We targeted data professionals, and we went in with a very kind of broad desire to just kind of understand how data is being used at organizations. Where is it effective? Where is it not? And we ended up surveying 441 different data professionals. That is anywhere from CIOs and CDOs down to director of analytics, and asking them kind of like, where are you making the investments? Where are your concerns? What's working? What's not working? It was a pretty comprehensive survey, and I think the results were really interesting.
Thank you, Ken. We also have Domo Senior Director of Product Marketing, Nikos Acuña.
Hey, Mohammed. Hey, Ken. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to diving into this research as it really shares what Domo provides and solves for in market.
Excellent, excellent. And Nikos, I just wanted to ask too, do you find that the research relates to what you're seeing with customers and what Domo's doing?
Yes, I feel that it's really consistent with what we're seeing in the field. I feel that the problem that you kind of addressed in your opening is that BI adoption taps out at 30% of the organization. And that's just because the life cycle of data is just way too long. IT gets involved. You have what's called a BI breadline that continues to extend. They have to issue tickets, and then they actually have to craft custom environments for that data to be accessed by analysts. So we find that when you push a lot of those technical work streams further downstream for the analysts so that they're not having to spend 80% of their time chasing down data, this really increases BI adoption in market.
Awesome. Well, with that, let's turn over to the research. Ken, I'm really interested to know, what were some of the surprising findings that you had with the research?
Yeah, so I think the biggest surprise, and it's the kind of surprise that fronted the entirety of the report that we generated out of it, is that there is, despite billions of dollars of investment, still a sizable gap for many individuals, for many organizations, between the data investments that they've made and the value they're getting from them when it comes to making actual decisions. The data shows, for example, that when you ask kind of like what's the biggest bottleneck for data having a more strategic value, that 42%, which is the largest response by far, 42% of people say actually using the data effectively to inform or direct decisions. That's where things begin to fall down. Yes, there are a variety of other problems, but the fact that the gap is so large there suggests that even after all the investments to fix those other issues, there's still this other chasm that needs to be crossed.
If I'm hearing it properly, you're saying a bunch of companies have invested a lot of money in data. A huge percentage of respondents have said, hey, they're not actually using the data to make decisions. So then what are they doing to make decisions?
Well, that's a good question. 51% of our respondents, so a majority of our respondents, said that despite all the investments, key strategic decisions are still being made from the gut rather than from insights actually generated by data.
Very interesting finding on making decisions from the gut. Nikos, I'm interested in your view, what you're seeing innovative companies do in terms of solving this problem.
Yeah, so I feel like when data starts off in a lot of different systems and it's very fragmented, you actually need that data presented for a specific purpose that's meant to drive a prescriptive behavior to achieve a specific business outcome. So you not only have to consume the data in a way that's relevant to that user, it's either a frontline worker or somebody that's in the field. The implication is such that the experience is tailored for that person and it's deployed right where the work gets done. So this is why Domo has introduced the concept of a data app, essentially where you have the data consumer, they're a knowledge worker that needs to get something done in the field. And then you need to incorporate these other workflows to make this data and some of these experiences very custom to the business user. And then from there, you need to distribute this information to other sources or other people and users in the company, essentially in order to get that work done or to automate that decision in real time. So we believe that in market, this whole concept of a data app is going to be really powerful and resonate with a lot of both data practitioners and business vision leaders.
And Nikos, also help me understand too. So, I've heard the term data app just being used in the last couple of months, and so on. Like, how is a data app different than dashboards?
Right. So a data app, so a dashboard is really just the first level of the organization of that data for the consumer. So again, it's got to be tailored for that person that's either the executive that just needs to make a decision on their mobile phone, or somebody with an iPad that's sitting in a line of business at a retail store. And then you can change it and tailor it for the job that needs to be done. And then we move on to the second layer of this is when we incorporate workflows that make these data experiences that are more custom to that business user that needs to make that decision, then we wrap workflows around that or a specific business process. And once you know that outcome that you want to drive or a predictive model that you want to bake into a forecast, for instance, so that you know whether or not you're going to hit your target this quarter, this needs to get embedded into that business process. And then finally, you need to essentially wrap that around being able to distribute this information to other key people, other stakeholders in the organization. So it's not just a dashboard. It incorporates kind of those 4 levels in what we call the data app maturity curve here at Domo.
Okay, interesting. So basically, the dashboard's a start. It's kind of like a static experience. Everyone come look at the same thing. But when you're truly kind of working up that maturity curve for data apps, you're starting to think about where does the decision get made, what the experience needs to look like, whether it's a workflow or process needs to be introduced. Does it need to be on a mobile phone? Does it need to be embedded, pushed into a CRM system, et cetera? So the data app gets as close as possible to the actual decision so you can make impact. So that's interesting. And I think it's definitely a space that solves this, that appears to hopefully go against this problem and help organizations make more of their I should say, I'll tongue twisted this one, but anyways, all right. Ken, I'm interested to hear about other findings that you also had, other challenges that you also observed in the research.
Well, Nikos's point is actually really interesting here because, we asked a lot of questions about kind of like what investments are you making, what amount of data are you producing, is it likely to increase, and what are your concerns in terms of data bottlenecks and data fragmentation. And as you can imagine, there was a positive correlation between people who were going to spend a lot of money producing more data and concerns that data fragmentation would grow. We also then wanted to ask questions about kind of mechanically, logistically, why do you think that you're having problems? Why do you think data fragmentation might be increasing? Why do you think there might be this gap? And among the people who are most concerned about data fragmentation, we found something really interesting, which is that the top 4 explanations for technical challenges that would limit the value of current BI approaches, from those people who were already concerned that data fragmentation was going to be a real problem, they were the following. End users don't know how or where to look for business data to inform actions. The rules being measured are arbitrary and not derived from the data. That there's a failure to integrate some of the data sets, and that there's a gap between the system that exists and the data and the action being taken. And I think what's really interesting about this is it's kind of gets exactly what Nikos is talking about, right? Dashboards are like that first level, and you can have a really pretty dashboard, right? It can look great. But if you look at that dashboard and it doesn't help you then make the very specific decision that you have to make at the moment you're looking at it, then all it was a pretty visualization. And you still run into these same 4 problems. And I think that tells us a lot about where the concern and where the gap comes from.
It's really interesting to see that respondents are saying that end users don't know where to look for the right data. And I think this touches to the point I was making earlier, which is like you have all these great data investments, but everyone in the organization honestly can't use the data. They don't even know how to access it. And so, Nikos, I'm interested just to hear about how innovative data companies are approaching this problem.
Definitely. Yeah. So we talked about BI adoption tapping out at 30% earlier. And so one of the main reasons for that is that you won't get more than 60% of your critical data into a data warehouse. So this data is, of course, for making decisions on taking action. You're talking about spreadsheets, metadata, social data, and a lot of companies just won't put that data into a data warehouse. Spreadsheets are probably the most prevalent in terms of data in the wild, right? So marketing departments and sales, they live on these. It's metadata around campaigns, spend and forecasting data, and sales, but none of that data will get integrated into a data warehouse, and IT just won't let you do it, right? But it's very important to reporting. You may have bought a new system that piles on that tech debt, and that system will even take anywhere from like 10 months to integrate or get that data into an environment that supports the analysis that you actually need. So by the time it gets to the visual layer, that data is essentially gone. IT loses visibility of it. They lose security and governance. And I'm sure this is what you're seeing in the field too, Mohammed, is that analysts in their respective departments are getting their own visual tools because of that reason. They don't want to go through that IT bottleneck, right? So essentially, the best and the brightest, in market are using. They're compressing these longer data life cycles, often by using Domo, which enables these technical workflows to be pushed downstream for a lot more self-service. So analysts aren't spending most of their time chasing down that data. And again, that's what really closes the data decision gap.
And I should emphasize that in the that practice is not widely distributed. 76% of our respondents indicated that their organization relied on dedicated data analyst teams to be the ones who could make recommendations about decision, which is an astonishingly high number at this point in time.
You said what was the percentage again?
76%, 3 out of every 4.
So basically, if I have a question, I ask that team, and if they get back to me in 2 weeks and that question is still relevant, then maybe it's valuable, if you will, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I'm kind of putting these two thoughts together, Nikos. You're basically saying, hey, need to provide a first-class experience that leverages the data you have in your data stores, but also allows all that other data that your lines of business teams and your analysts and every part of your organization work with data in a governed way, and empower them, Ken, so they can start answering questions at the speed of which they operate versus relying on other teams. So how do you empower the rest of your organization truly with data? I'm interested, Ken, any other big challenges that you observed in the research?
Yeah, there are some technical challenges that I think line up with this in ways that, given what we've talked about, aren't necessarily surprising. When we asked people to stack rank the technical challenges that really made it difficult to use data effectively, they cited things like complexity of implementation, lack of integration, the lack of time or money to build those implementations, and all of those kind of fit with the idea that if we're not getting all the data together, if we don't know how to do something strategically here, if we don't know what sort of data needs to be into the hands of field level managerial or decision makers, then there's this sense that technically the data isn't quite on par.
Wow. So basically, I think I know I can speak firsthand here. When someone has a data project and you get an estimate of 6 to 12 months just to get the tools connected to make this happen. Interested also, Nikos, in your view from customers and what you're seeing in the market around how organizations are overcoming this challenge.
Yeah, definitely. So just tying this back to what we were talking about, when we think of dashes in their traditional sense, they're really specialized, and they require knowledge workers. They require specified like data dictionary, taxonomy, semantic layer, so that that you can work with that data. And so, unfortunately, this often requires a lot of data engineering chops or building a separate cube to do that multidimensional analysis. And so here, that's a very specific example of how the insight is actually separate from the action. So in this new world of data apps, workflows and the analytics products should be designed that are specific to any role, but then built for making that specific decision. And then essentially the experience is such that the UX guides that workflow. So it should also be about the ability to sync data and then plug it right back to that source system, right where the work gets done. So again, IT gets to layer on, governance, and they get to put all of the security measures that they need on top of it. The integration is more tightly knit so that it compresses that data lifecycle. And then most importantly, the decision maker gets to make that decision in real time because of the access to data is solved for right where they need to make that decision.
Awesome.
And just one additional point, I do feel like the fragmentation and just the commoditization and based on kind of like the entire ecosystem of data. When we're talking about a full stack data platform, it's really convoluted, and I think people get really confused with a lot of these tools that are available. You have the ETL data pipeline layer where you need to do a lot of the transforms and the joins to get the data working in the right place. You have a different set of ETL tools to data prep. And then you got to use a Matillion or an intelligent informatica systems to get the work done to create that entire data pipeline. And then you need to plug that into your DB2 servers, plug that back into your source systems to do your transforms. Only then can you light up those cards. So I feel like with this fragmentation, if you don't have kind of one single source or one single pane of glass, so to speak, to work on your data, a one end-to-end data platform, a lot of these end users are going to be very challenged with getting to the data in a place where they can make good decisions and get the insights that they need.
Ken, Nikos, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this great wealth of research, as well as some practical insights on what organizations can go do differently. I'm also lucky to be joined by another colleague of mine, Scott Hillman, who's a technical product manager. One of the interesting things about Domo is that we were originally designed to try to help everyone in the organization use data and run your company actually on your cell phone. That was kind of the vision when the company started 10 years ago. Scott's been listening attentively to the discussion that we've been having, and I'd love to turn it over to Scott just to share how Domo is trying to help address some of the problems that we discussed.
Thanks for the intro, Mohammed. Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Hillman, and I oversee product marketing for the apps platform here at Domo. We touched on this concept of a data app a lot during the discussion, so I want to do two things here. First, I want to demo an example of a data app, just to show you what it is and what it does. And then I'll cycle through that again one level deeper to explain the features in Domo that actually make it possible. You can think of a data app as an outcome-oriented approach to using Domo. By focusing on the outcome you want to drive, your data becomes actionable and not just accessible. It also becomes valuable for your entire organization and not only for executives and data specialists. At Domo, we think the connection to this research is pretty clear. Data apps are the answer to the data decision gap. But before we get started, I want to note that there's more than one way to build a data app on Domo. We have no code, low code, and pro code options. It just depends on your resources, the scope of your problem, and the level of customization you really want. The one I'm going to show you now is completely no code, but still fairly customized. And I'm emphasizing this approach because it's accessible to almost any level of technical ability. So let's set the stage for this example. Imagine you're a factory manager for a company that produces widgets, and your job is to hit production goals. To do that, you need to make sure your floor is optimally staffed on a weekly basis. The shift rostering data app wraps your staffing responsibility into a tool that makes this crucial process seamless for both the factory manager and the frontline worker. So if I jump into this data app, which by the way, you can access either on a desktop environment or on a mobile phone, I can see all the information laid out that I need to begin to make the decision about who I want to roster. At the top, I have the upcoming shift requirements, which lays out the date, the AM versus the PM shift, who the team leader is for that shift, and the staff needed for that shift. If I scroll down a little bit, I can see what my staff looks like for this week and who the team leader that they're mapped to for their shifts are going to be. And at the very bottom, I can see my week at a glance and begin to look at what the gaps might be for each day, for each staffing day coming up. So right now, this probably looks kind of like a typical dashboard to you, but the difference, the thing that makes it a data app is the fact that I can begin to actually act on this information. So here I notice there's a gap on the 16th where I have a shortfall of 3 staff. So I click on the bar chart and it filters the information throughout the rest of the card. And I can come up here to see what my need is. So I read across this line and I can see that it's May 16th, Kumar is the team leader, and I need 3 staff scheduled there. So I'm actually going to go back down here and unfilter this so I can see what my team's week looks like. And I'm going to come here and I can actually begin to take action and schedule these workers for that shift. So I select the date I know it was the 16th. I know it was the AM shift. The team leader was Kumar. And I grabbed all this info from back up here earlier. And then I'm going to take a look here and see who's a little bit light this week. So I can see these 3 people at the bottom probably make the most sense. So I'm going to jump into here and I'm going to grab those 3 individuals. And then I'm going to click submit. And what that does is it writes that data into our rostering and requirements data set and actually sends those people an SMS notification that they've been put onto that shift. So if I need to cancel a shift, I can also do that. I come down to this component down here and I find the row that corresponds to the shift that I just scheduled. I select cancel rostering and I write that back to the same data set. So what we're doing here is we're going a little bit beyond a typical dashboard. And by doing this, we've built something much more efficient and valuable than just a data visualization. It's a fairly simple example, but it's also powerful when you think about the importance of the task it accomplishes and when you imagine it being done at scale. Because now you have an analytics tool that anyone can use and derive value from. Now you're actually operationalizing data across the whole company. Now you're orchestrating action between different people in your business and you're getting work done. But what's also important is how this data app gets created in the first place. IT solutions are typically fairly complex, expensive, and require teams of people to build and integrate. Building this data app is much easier than that. So let's jump into the platform capabilities that power this data app. So what's under the hood of a no-code data app like this? Well, all the tools you need are already in Domo. It's really just a matter of configuring them in the right way. The first area of our toolkit allows us to integrate data into structures that our application can use. These are all the data sources your app will read from and write to. This particular app has 2 primary data sets. One provides the number of staff needed for each shift, and the other contains the names of all your staff members and information about them. Domo makes integrating these 2 things easy. You really don't need to be a data engineer or a data scientist to get your arms around it. It's very intuitive and completely self-service. So where is this data actually coming from? Well, the staffing quantity needs might be maintained by an internal team, maybe a demand planning group that keeps track of your orders and understands the needs of your output based on the demand you're receiving and the orders you're getting. Automatic alerts will let you know when this team has updated that data and refreshed it. And then for the other piece, your actual staff info, in a scenario like this, you're probably working with a contracting agency. So that agency would maintain this data. And this would get pushed to your data warehouse using a pre-built connector and then provisioned on a regular cadence using a data flow. Between those 2 basic processes, you have all the data that your app needs to function correctly. So let me show you where a lot of this action happens. So here we have the Domo data warehouse, which is going to pull in all the different data sources that feed to our app. So I use the search function to find this data set. I happen to know what it's called already. And here you can see an overview of this data set. This is actually a combined set using both of those components that I talked about earlier. And from here, you can check out a lot of different things about your data. You can take a look at it in table format just to get a sense of how it's structured. You can look at all the different cards that it's powering. And you might notice some of these from the data app if you look closely. You can also look at the data lineage. And this really just shows you what are all the derivative data sets that led to, in an ETL process that led to the creation of the one that we're looking at now. You can also take a look at the history of the data set. And this shows you the last time that the information in the set was updated. And then lastly, you can schedule alerts around this data set so you understand anytime it's changed or updated, which could be particularly useful if you are maybe performing some fixes or maintenance on this app. And then lastly, you can check out and control the security and governance of this data set. So you can control access at the individual user level And then you can even provision access by row by user. So you can get very granular with PDP and governance of the data that you're using. And that all flows through to the data app itself. So what you can see here is that it's a completely self-serve data integration environment, right? And what this does is compress the data lifecycle dramatically, meaning analysts and business managers don't need to lean on data teams and data engineers to provision them access. So the next piece is the UI of the data app. This presents the underlying data we just saw in a format that can guide the user to take action. So a really useful tool we have for presenting information and building data apps is called a Domo story. And this acts kind of like a canvas on which you can hold all the cards and app components that you want to place inside it. So in this outermost frame is the story itself. This is really just the container. And then inside that container, you put the individual cards that provide your users with the information they need to make a decision. And then along with the cards, you also have these packaged app, these app components, which are really the things that allow a user to take action and input data or write data back to something, or in this case, these are the things that are allowing you to schedule a shift or cancel a shift. And then there's other behind the scenes Domo functionality like Magic ETL that really wires the whole backend and logic of the data app together. So the next piece is the logic. This processes the inputs and generates the outputs of your data app. And this is really where we take that step to go beyond a data visualization into that action-oriented layer. So I mentioned these app components in the last piece. What we have here, the thing that's allowing us to take this action to roster the staff is an app component called Form Builder. And you can grab this from the Domo App Store and drop it onto your Domo story. You configure this form to collect the data you need, and you link it to a data set that it writes to, and that's really it. It's very easy. There's no code required, and you now have a read and write application. If you can build a Google form, you can use Form Builder. The next app component we have is called Inline Editor. And this is the thing that allows me to cancel a shift. And it's the same thing as Form Builder. You grab the component from the Domo App Store, you configure it, and then you drop it into your story canvas. This is what allows you to manipulate data sets that power your cards right from the dashboard itself. Everything else you see here, whether it's this widget or these are simply cards or data visualizations that support the action I'm taking in one or either of these app components. So the last big piece of this data app, and really the brains behind it, is Magic ETL. And this is where you're programming, so to speak. This is the logic that's powering the read and write from the various data sets. This is where you're creating things that you would normally refer to as functions in a software application. This is how we're triggering alerts. This is how we are firing off the SMS notifications to mobile phones. This is what is enabling the write back connectors and what's triggering the data flows. So when we get to this level where you're wiring everything up in Magic ETL, you're using app components inside of a Domo story UI, and you're integrating all that data in the back end using connectors and data flows. We're no longer talking about a dashboard anymore. A dashboard might fit the bill perfectly in some scenarios, but it's not going to get you to this level of interactivity and this ability to actually orchestrate and get work done across your organization. And then finally, I should mention, with Domo Everywhere, you have the ability to distribute this data app experience to anyone inside or outside of your organization. So let's say you are working with that staffing agency. Perhaps they'd want to have access to this tool. But really, any vendor, any partner, any customer you can share a card in Domo with, you can also share a data app with. So hopefully that example clearly illustrates the data app's vision and how it solves the data decision gap problem. At Domo, we have a framework for thinking about data apps, and this provides a good summary of what we saw with the Shift rostering data app. So at the first level, it's really just a dashboard. It presents the information that you need to make a decision in a visual format. But on top of that, we build a little bit more of a user experience and personalize it. So we're able to drop multiple different views of the data into the same Domo story canvas. And then we get to the business process level where we're able to input app components that allow users to take action. We can wire all those actions together and orchestrate the different roles that users need to play using Magic ETL and some of our data integration capabilities. And then at the fourth level, you can take everything below it and distribute that out to whoever needs to use the data app, so you can put information in the hands of people who need it to get work done. As we've covered, we at Domo really believe that that data apps bridge this data decision gap and enable companies to become truly data driven. By placing data into a purpose-built app-led experience, data apps empower any user to create and receive value from digital data. I hope you found this overview of data apps helpful. I really just scratched the surface with this example, and there's a ton more to get into if you're interested. But thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.
Scott, thank you so much for just sharing an overview of what we're working on here at Domo. I'd love to just turn it back to Ken to get a sense of, how does this fit with some of the challenges that you're observing?
Look, I think this is really in line. I think, people talk all the time about kind of like, making data-driven decisions. And I think we sometimes talk about democratization of those decisions. And to be honest, we have so much data out there. It's not a democratization question. It's just a dissemination question. Gibson has that great line that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And that's the situation. We have all this data that we've collected, and we're just not making real use of it. And I think when you see the data get closer, when you see what these apps are capable of, it feels like, yes, this could be the kind of thing that helps to shrink the technical and attitudinal issues that we're seeing at the heart of the data decision gap.
Ken, thank you again for joining us and sharing this great research and some practical guidance. With that, I'd love to, again, thank you for joining our overall session. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I recently joined Domo. And I joined Domo because I saw the power of the platform itself. And you may be interested to learn more about the platform as well. And so feel free to sign up for a more detailed overview and demo for your team. You'll also find that in our Q&A section, we have links to resources that can benefit you. And with that, I just want to say thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. That was a great session. So big thanks to Domo and Manchester Street, to the two teams for putting together all the research that they shared and really thinking through how to bridge that gap between data and decisions. Again, as a reminder, if you have questions, feedback, thoughts that you want to share, the Whova platform, you can reach out to the speakers directly using that platform. Next up is an hour-long lunch break. We'll be back at 1:30 for a session called the 12-Step Program for Improving Organizational Data